I am Ava Harper, 28 years old, and no one in my family could have imagined that after my grandmother's death, she would leave everything to me. The lawyer read it aloud. Clearly, the entire ranch and ownership of the Silver Creek silver mine were left to Ava Harper. It didn't just surprise me, it made my parents and my sister look at me with pure rage. They were ready to cry, to lie, and to accuse me of having something to do with her death. But what they didn't know was that she had left behind a recording, one that would silence them all. This isn't just about inheritance. This is a battle to tell the truth, all the way to the final chapter. I'm a freelance writer living in Seattle, accustomed to the city's rhythm and sleepless nights at my desk, when I suddenly received a call informing me that Eleanor Brooks had died in an accident at an abandoned silver mine. The call felt like a hand yanking me out of my cramped apartment and hurling me straight into childhood memories, to those summer days I used to sit beside her in a tiny library, listening to tales of Montana legends and scribbling them into an old leather notebook I still carry with me to this day. 3 days later, I returned to Silver Creek and stepped into her funeral, held right at her wooden ranch, the smell of kerosene lamps, apple pie, and damp pine still intact, just like the memories. Townsfolk came to pay their respects, but the atmosphere within the Harper family was so cold that words were unnecessary to sense the deep fractures beneath. My father, William Harper, stood solemn like it was merely a formal affair. My mother, Margaret, wore a flawless expression made for every camera lens, and Chloe, my sister, wore an expensive dress, her eyes artfully red-rimmed only when people were watching. In the corner, Aunt Clara Dawson stood silently, with no one in the family making a move toward her, but when I walked up, she embraced me tightly, tight enough that I felt the last remaining warmth this family had to offer. The funeral ended in silence, broken only by the wind and the clinking of mourning flags. A few days later, I received an invitation from James Whitmore, Eleanor's longtime attorney and close friend, asking me to attend the will reading at the ranch's library. The warm, wooden room, lit by the golden glow of oil lamps, only heightened the tension as everyone gathered. James opened the thick folder and spoke in a slow, clear voice. The entire ranch and ownership of the Silver Creek mine were left to me. The room fell utterly silent for several seconds before William's voice cut through, tense. Why not him and Margaret? My mother glanced sideways, eyes a mix of shock and fury. Chloe leapt up, her voice trembling with rage. There must be some mistake. Giving everything to someone who hasn't even bothered to visit Grandma in years? I looked straight at her. No need to raise my voice, just said one sentence clear enough for the whole room to hear. Chloe, you don't know. But I've come here more than both our parents and you combined. I was with her when she was sick, and I didn't have to post it online for the world to see. Chloe went quiet, her face flushed red, though her eyes still burned with defiance. James handed me an old key along with a small envelope from Eleanor. No one said another word, they just got up and left, their footsteps brisk, the door slamming shut. And I couldn't tell if it was out of anger or if they'd already started plotting something else. I stayed at the ranch, alone. The following days passed in silence, broken only by the wind brushing over the wooden roof, Shadow's footsteps on the old floorboards, and the turning of pages in the library, a place I instinctively returned to, seeking warmth between the past and present. Shadow, the German shepherd Eleanor had raised for nearly 8 years, remained at the ranch as if still guarding every familiar corner of hers. He didn't bark much, just, quietly, followed me, lay under my chair as I wrote, or stood watch whenever he heard something strange outside. One time, I opened the small cabinet where she used to hide snacks. He came over slowly, gently rested his head on my lap as if asking, "Where is she?" I stroked his warm back and whispered, "I'm looking for the answer too." On a foggy afternoon with the fields wrapped in white mist, I dragged an old wooden chair closer to the bookshelf where she used to sit. My fingers ran along the faded spines and stopped at a thick volume titled Legends and Mines of Montana, the same one she used to scribble notes in when I was little. When I opened the cover, there was a faint rustling. Something had been tucked inside the thick binding. My heart tightened. Carefully, I loosened the book's spine, and there it was, wrapped in thin parchment, a silver glinting hand-drawn map detailing tunnels, ore veins, and strange symbols. Along the edge, a familiar handwriting appeared in faded brown ink. For Ava, the storyteller of the moonlight. I reached out and touched the line, feeling as if her hand was still there, guiding me into an untold chapter. The map was unlike any standard mining chart. It intertwined local legends, astronomical markers, and symbols of the indigenous people who once lived around here. In one corner of the map, a crescent moon was circled in black ink. Next to it, the symbol L7A. Something I didn't understand then, but that would later change everything I knew about Silver Creek. I spread the map across the wooden table, pulled out my old leather notebook, and began to take notes. My pen slid over the paper, tracing the mineral lines like I was following a story, not told through words, but through earth, stone, and light. I didn't know then that outside, William's black car had returned to town, and shadows had begun to move in silence. But inside Eleanor's library, I could only hear my heartbeat, slow, pounding, and distinct, like the opening drumroll of a journey I had never dared imagine. A silver mine that held not only treasure, but secrets my family had long tried to bury. 3 days after I discovered the map, Silver Creek was no longer quiet, and neither was I. Chloe started posting a stream of videos on social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, with perfectly calibrated lighting, subtle makeup, and a heartbroken voice. I just can't believe this. The sister I once loved stole the legacy of our entire family just days after our grandmother passed. Each video came with hashtags, #moonlight_betrayal. She stood in front of the ranch gate, tears glistening, with the Montana dusk sky behind her looking poetic and dramatic. The shares skyrocketed, comments stabbed like knives. If my grandma died, I'd suspect her too. A failed writer? Sounds like financial motive. Has anyone called the cops yet? I turned off my phone, shut down my laptop. But I couldn't shut off the stares in town, the way shopkeepers avoided eye contact, the half-hearted handshakes from neighbors who used to chat with Eleanor every evening. All I wanted was to sit in the library, continue reading her notes, quietly study the map. But the constant ringing of phones, the engines revving at the gate, even a group of young vloggers filming outside the ranch fence turned the air suffocating. Chloe had turned grief into content, and me into the perfect villain in a play glittering with social media filters. That evening, I sat at the old dining table, unable to eat dinner. Shadow lay underfoot, his head resting on my shoe, his black eyes staring into the void as if sensing the storm hadn't passed. And just then, my phone buzzed. One single message from an unknown number. "They're accessing the banking system." I frowned, heart pounding. A second message arrived seconds later. "It's Lucas. You need to check the ownership. Don't wait too long." I looked out the window. The moonlight revealed a strange SUV parked at a distance, engine still running. Something was moving, not just rumors anymore, but real actions. I stood up, gripped Eleanor's key tightly in my hand, and knew the resistance had begun. Less than 24 hours after Lucas's message, I received a warning email from the bank. There had been a request to access the legal account tied to the Silver Creek mine from a strange IP in Missoula. The request was denied due to a failed two-factor authentication, but it felt like a knock on the sealed gate, ominous and provocative. I called Lucas back, and only then did I learn that this calm man had once been a cybersecurity engineer at a defense contractor before he quit to manage Eleanor's ranch, after she saved him from a personal crisis he never fully explained. "They won't stop," Lucas said, eyes never leaving the laptop screen as lines of code ran down like falling rain. "William is trying to transfer ownership through an offshore shell company registered in Nevada. They think you don't understand how the new digital asset registry system works, but Eleanor left a third layer of protection." Even I was surprised. I looked over and saw on the screen a QR scan embedded in an image file, a photo of Eleanor and me when I was 12, framed and sitting in the library. Beneath the code were faded words. "If they disown you, remember, blood doesn't make family, choice does." We began restoring the ownership verification system, confirming my identity with dual digital signatures and the personal documents Eleanor had left behind. Lucas worked as if rebuilding a fortress. Each command, each authentication round, each reclaiming step deliberate and sharp. I asked, "Is this even legal?" He replied without blinking, "Only if we can't prove you're the rightful owner." And trust me, Eleanor prepared everything. That evening, as I stepped onto the porch, moonlight revealed fresh tire tracks on the dirt road just beyond the gate. Someone had come, very close, and left. No threats, no warnings. Just a sign that they were probing for weak spots. Shadow let out a low growl, ears perked. I went back inside, locked all 4 bolts, then sat at the writing desk and scribbled one line into my old leather notebook. "I don't know how deep this game runs, but I know one thing: I'm not leaving." I began my mornings by tidying Eleanor's library, not because it was messy, but because I needed to understand this space as if it were a map of her soul. In the bottom drawer of her old writing desk, nestled among expired ink pens and a moldy cassette tape, I found a small wooden box, unlocked, tied only with a silver silk ribbon. My hands trembled slightly as I untied it. Inside was a stack of handwritten letters, neatly arranged by date, from 1979 to 1987. Nearly a decade I had known nothing about in the life of the woman I thought I understood. The first letter, written in a firm hand, read, "To William, my son. I know you'll never forgive me for refusing to sell the silver mine to Greystone Corporation, but Silver Creek was never meant to be hollowed to the bone and abandoned when drained. It's a place where everyone in this town once placed their faith, in the land and in each other." I turned to the next letters. William's words grew increasingly bitter, demanding, insulting, and threatening. One of his shortest notes read only, "You chose dirt over your son. You chose a bunch of poor farmers over giving me a real future." By 1984, Eleanor had stopped writing. There were no more replies from William, just a letter addressed to Judge Abigail Stone, who at the time hadn't yet taken the bench. "Abby, if one day Ava reads this letter, tell her this. The right choice is rarely the easy one, but if she's inherited anything from me, I hope it's resolve, and the clarity not to bow to money." I folded the letter, my chest tightening as if I'd swallowed a cold stone. For years, I'd believed my family's coldness came from me choosing writing over marketing or real estate like they wanted. But now I understood. I wasn't alone in that choice. My grandmother had once walked that same road, and she was cast out for believing in something bigger than profit. On a nearby shelf, I found an old photo album. On the last page was a picture of me sitting in Eleanor's lap, around 10 years old. Beneath it, faded handwriting read, "This girl understands the value of a story more than anyone." I rested my head on the table. I didn't cry, just sat in silence for a long time, as if I had just been called by name from the past. I didn't just inherit a silver mine, I inherited faith. And just as she once stood alone against something far bigger than herself, I knew. Now it was my turn. That night, there was no moon. Only the dim yellow light from the oil lamp in the library cast long shadows of me and Shadow across the wooden floor. I was carefully taping the edges of the map when I heard a strange sound from the back of the house, a very faint noise, like a door being lifted but not opened. Shadow lifted his head, growling low, then sprang up like a spring. I stood, my heart pounding like a war drum. I walked over to the window and gently pulled the curtain aside. The motion sensor light near the stables had turned on. Eleanor had installed a basic alarm system using motion and sound sensors, and now I saw the red lights blinking. Someone had just crossed the backyard. I didn't have time to think. Grabbing a flashlight, throwing on a coat, phone in hand, I ran out with Shadow. The night air was biting cold, and the whisper of dry wheat stalks sounded like eerie warnings. A few steps in, I heard a car engine roar to life, and headlights swept across the field. Someone in a truck was parked right at the edge of the wooden fence, clearly trying to get in deeper. I turned and ran, not knowing exactly where, only that I had to get away from that light. The engine roared louder, tires crunching on gravel. The truck surged toward me. I ran through wheat fields up to my chest, trying not to trip, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Then, suddenly, from the side of the vehicle, Shadow shot forward like an arrow, barking fiercely. His growls echoed through the night, teeth bared as he lunged at the front tire. The truck screeched to a halt, tires skidding. The driver clearly hadn't expected a dog to attack. I seized the moment, diving into a bush, rolling down into the dry ditch behind the barn, trying to stay silent. The truck revved and pulled away. I didn't know if it was because of Shadow or because they feared someone else might be watching. I waited a few minutes, my heart still shaking. When I whispered his name, Shadow emerged from the shadows, covered in mud but unharmed. He ran to me, nuzzled into my hand, as if to say, "It's okay now, Ava. It's okay." We returned to the house near midnight. I locked every door, reset the motion sensors, and scrawled a single line into my leather notebook. They don't just want the property. They're willing to intimidate. And if I show fear, they'll push further. I shut the notebook, looked at Shadow lying with his head at the door, and whispered, "We won't back down. Not 1 inch." The next morning brought a light drizzle. The fields looked pale beneath the gray mist, the air heavy as if Silver Creek itself was trying to warn me in its own way. I drove into town to pick up supplies: coffee, a few topographic maps, and an external hard drive for Eleanor's documents. But the moment I pushed open the door to the little roadside store, I felt a shift in the air. The shopkeeper, the same woman who used to slip me candy as a child, quietly avoided my gaze. A man at the counter whispered something into his wife's ear, and they left the moment I approached. I heard my name, Ava, on the small radio behind the counter. A local broadcaster was talking about Chloe Harper's latest video, which had surpassed 1.2 million views. She called it "The Journey to Reclaim Our Family Legacy," using words like theft, irregularities in inheritance, and estate conspiracy. I turned and walked quickly to my car, but not before a voice called out behind me, "There's no smoke without fire." That afternoon, I returned to the ranch, my head pounding like a hammer. Every time I checked my phone, there were dozens more comments, hundreds of anonymous messages, mostly critical, some strange. "We know you have the map. Watch out for the next accident." I activated every sensor system around the house, changed the locks with new codes Lucas had sent. But inside, I knew the worst wounds weren't coming from my family, but from the very town I once thought I belonged to. That evening, as I was sorting Eleanor's old notes in the library, I heard a vehicle stop at the gate. Not William, not Chloe, an old moss-green pickup truck. From it stepped a woman in a long gray coat, silver hair neatly tied up, leather boots caked in mud. Judge Abigail Stone. I recognized her instantly. Her face had appeared in old family photos, always beside Eleanor, sometimes standing between them during arguments. She didn't introduce herself, just placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes sharp as blades, but her voice warm. Eleanor once told me there would come a day when Ava wouldn't just write about legends, but live inside one that hadn't been told yet. I invited her into the library. She looked around, gently touched Eleanor's old wooden chair, then said, "You're surrounded, but don't think you're alone. This mine isn't just an asset, it's a crossroads of many lives," and Eleanor foresaw all of it. They don't just want the money. They want to erase everything she left behind. Even the truth. I looked at her. Her eyes held no doubt, only something I hadn't clearly seen in anyone since coming back. Faith. And when she pulled a thin folder from her coat pocket and placed it on the table, "I think it's time you saw this, and prepared for the upcoming town meeting." I met my father in the place he always felt most confident, in a perfectly tailored gray suit, sitting upright at Silver Creek's only cafe, which he once funded to upgrade the town's image. I got his message at 8 a.m. "Let's talk like adults. Before you ruin everything." I knew he wasn't asking, he was issuing terms, but I still came. He didn't greet me, just slid a black espresso across the table without asking if I wanted it. His eyes paused on me for a second, as if assessing whether I was still the meek, easily steered girl I used to be. "You need to stop," he said the moment I sat down. "This town has a longer memory than you realize. You're digging up things Eleanor buried." I looked at him, steady. She didn't bury the truth. She hid it from people who didn't deserve it. William let out a short laugh, thinly veiled contempt on his face. "You think that land belongs to you because of a piece of paper? Do you even know why she died there, in that old, uninspected mine shaft untouched for over 20 years? I froze. He didn't know, or pretended not to know, that I had the map. But the way he emphasized each word chilled me. "Are you saying her death wasn't an accident?" I asked. William raised an eyebrow. "I'm not saying anything. But an old woman, alone at night, walking into an abandoned mine. No one stopped her, no one knew. You think that's coincidence?" I clenched my hands under the table. He was testing my reaction, but so was I. "If you know so much," I said slowly, "why weren't you at the funeral? Or were you too busy filing ownership transfers to your offshore shell company in Nevada?" William's eyes darkened. He stood. "You think you're clever, but you're just a girl writing fairy tales in a rented apartment. You have no lawyer, no power, and no idea what legal warfare looks like." I stood too. I have the truth, and the truth doesn't need a loud voice to exist. Before he turned to leave, he leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Eleanor always thought you were her reflection. But, in the end, she died alone. And if you don't stop, you will too." He left, the espresso untouched. I stayed. Didn't touch the cup, didn't tremble. I just saw more clearly than ever before. This wasn't just a dispute over property. This was a war between two sets of values, and one side was willing to erase even blood to win. I left the ranch on Monday morning to meet Abigail at the town hall office to discuss the possibility of initiating an official community meeting regarding the ownership of the silver mine. We planned to hold it at the ranch itself, the same place where Eleanor had hosted informal town gatherings for nearly 20 years. The meeting ran longer than expected because she wanted me to understand. Telling a story in public isn't like writing a chapter of a novel. It takes time, evidence, and quiet strength in the face of noise. I returned by late afternoon. Shadow didn't run out to greet me like usual. The motion sensor light in the backyard had been turned off. The library door was still locked, but I immediately sensed something was wrong. A picture frame on the wall was tilted. The electrical outlet below had been tampered with and hastily reattached. The desk still held the silver mine map, but not intact. A corner had been cut out. the very part marked with the L7A coordinates and the crescent moon symbol. I called Lucas. Within 30 minutes, he arrived with his laptop and a mobile signal scanner. In under an hour, we found something Chloe hadn't anticipated. She had unknowingly allowed her phone to reconnect automatically to the ranch's Wi-Fi, still saved from previous visits. The old router Eleanor used kept detailed logs, including login times, device names, and apps accessed. Chloe had logged in at 11:27 a.m., stayed for nearly 40 minutes, attempted to locate digital files but failed, and finally cut out the physical map to take it with her. My throat tightened. Betrayal from the same little sister who once held my hand every Christmas Eve, now a trespasser, stealing the clues our grandmother left behind. But Lucas was colder and more efficient. Good. She left a trace. This isn't just theft, this is documented illegal entry. And if you want to strike back, now's the time. We printed the router logs, backed up the remaining map fragment, and transferred everything to a secure USB drive. Lucas even uncovered one small detail. The barn camera, thought to be broken by Chloe, was still functioning. A blurry but identifiable clip showed Chloe exiting through the back, something wrapped in her coat, disappearing beyond the fence. I watched the footage in silence, not out of anger, but because of an old, gnawing sorrow. How could someone be so ruthless to their own blood for a piece of paper? But then I reminded myself, they didn't steal the memories. They couldn't erase the truth. That evening, I sat again in the library and wrote in the leather notebook, "When they wield lies as weapons, I will build my foundation on the truth." I met Clara on a drizzly afternoon at her sculpture workshop, a moss-covered wooden cabin hidden deep in the pine woods north of town. The air was filled with the scent of sawdust, sap, and oil paint. Clara greeted me with a subtle nod, her face aged beyond her years, eyes hollow, as if they had seen too many things others tried to forget. We sat by the wood stove. I didn't ask much, just handed her the cut map and the video still of Chloe sneaking into the ranch. She remained silent for a long time, then gently placed her hand on the still image. I always knew our family would come back to destroy everything. I seized the moment. "Aunt Clara, what happened the night Eleanor died? There's something in my heart that won't believe it was just chance." She didn't look at me, just reached for a piece of wood and began carving it with a small knife, as if to keep her hands from trembling. "That night Eleanor called me, 9:12 p.m. She said someone was sneaking into the mine. She took the map to verify if they knew the exact location of the lunarium vein. I planned to go, but William called me at 9:20. He asked if I'd spoken to Eleanor. His voice was strange, like he was hiding something. When I said no, he hung up. She set the knife down, looked at me, her eyes cloudy. I got there too late. When I arrived, Eleanor's car was parked crooked on the edge, door wide open, flashlight dropped on the stone floor, and she was lying motionless at the entrance to shaft number 3. Police called it an accident, but that mine had been sealed off for over 10 years. Only someone from the family would know the way in, and they'd need the old key. So who opened the gate? I sat frozen. Fragments in my mind began aligning. The map, the voice recording, William's eyes in the cafe, and Chloe's suspicious silence whenever the accident was mentioned. Clara took a deep breath and pulled a small metal box from a drawer. "She gave me this a few months ago, told me, if anything happens, give it to Ava, not William, not Chloe." I opened the box. Inside was a cassette tape, clearly labeled, 24 hours before death, Eleanor Harper, confidential notes. I looked at Clara. She didn't need to say anything else, because I already knew. Every story has a moment where the narrator stops, takes a breath, and continues with blood instead of ink. That moment was now. I sat alone in the library as night blanketed Silver Creek, light rain tapping on the metal roof like distant whispers. Shadow lay posted at the door, alert but silent. On the table was the old cassette player Clara had kept for years, now, for the first time, turned on to reveal the voice of the woman who had led me to this journey. I pressed play. Static filled the beginning, followed by a long pause. Then Eleanor's voice emerged, hoarse, slow, and weary. If you're hearing this, Ava, then I probably didn't get the chance to say it all. I froze. My throat closed up. The air in the room felt thick, almost solid. I don't believe in keeping everything forever, but some things aren't ready to be revealed. And I waited too long, hoping one day my son would understand why I refused to sell the mine. The tape continued, sometimes fragmented, sometimes clear, like a whispered conversation with her own conscience. William never forgave me. And when the first corporation approached in 1983, I knew money wasn't the only thing they were after. Lunarium isn't just a rare mineral. It's power, Ava. It could redefine technology, but in the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. And my son chose the other side. I sat in stillness, gripping the pen in my notebook. Eleanor was confirming the very suspicions I'd buried deep inside. I tried to hide the map, encrypt the coordinates so even someone like Chloe, though blood, couldn't sell it off with a single click. I knew they'd come back, one by one. But I placed my bet on you, Ava. Not because you're a writer, but because you know how to listen. The recording paused for a moment, then her voice softened, like a breeze in the night. I know you'll be afraid, but the truth is always scarier than sweet lies. And if you choose to protect it, remember, you're not alone. There are people who will show up when you need them, like Clara, like Abigail, and maybe some you'd never expect. A soft exhale, the tape's final sound, then silence. I sat, motionless. Outside, the rain had stopped. A crescent moon peeked through the clouds. Shadow lifted his head, walked over, and rested his muzzle on my lap. I stroked his warm back and whispered, "I'll tell your story, but not with words, through action." I stood up, placed the notebook atop the remaining map, and wrote a new line. If family is where the wounds began, then truth is where the healing starts. Sunday afternoon, the skies cleared after a week of gray rain. The field in front of Eleanor's ranch had been cleaned, rows of rustic wooden chairs set out like an open-air auditorium, and the late summer sunlight filtered through the pine trees, casting golden light across the yard. More people from Silver Creek showed up than I had expected. Some brought their children, others came with their partners. Some stood quietly at a distance, just to listen. Under a makeshift white canopy, I stood beside Abigail and Lucas, facing William in his pale gray suit, his eyes sharp and cold, as if he still believed this was all just a performance by his reckless daughter. Chloe arrived late, wearing oversized sunglasses and an off-shoulder white dress as if she were attending a fashion shoot. I opened with words of thanks, my voice still trembling but my gaze steady. I told my story, from the discovery of the map, the letters in the library, to the recording I then played aloud. Eleanor's voice rang out, raspy yet clear, speaking of trust, of those who listen, and of a choice to pass on power not through blood, but through heart. The yard was utterly silent. William tried to interrupt, but Abigail produced a signed copy of Eleanor's private authorization, declaring me the sole legal heir of the land and all associated properties. Then Lucas presented the Wi-Fi access logs, showing Chloe's device connecting, along with camera footage of her sneaking into the library. Some people exhaled audibly, others looked at Chloe with eyes that no longer held trust. I didn't offer accusations. I simply recounted, as a storyteller would, and let the truth carry its own weight. When it was all over, Abigail stepped forward and formally closed the civil lawsuit filed by the Harper family, while opening an investigation into the theft of documents and unlawful entry. I turned toward the people, bowed my head. not to seek forgiveness, but to thank them for listening. In that moment, I was no longer the eccentric, forgotten daughter of the Harper family. I was Ava, the storyteller of the moonlight and the guardian of what Eleanor believed was worth protecting. Shadow gave a soft bark behind me, like an invisible applause, and I knew everything was only just beginning, but I was no longer alone. 1 month after the community meeting, I stayed in Silver Creek, not out of legal obligation or fear of lingering threats, but because I began to feel this place was healing, from its roots outward. The ranch was renamed Moonlight Hollow, as per Eleanor's final note, and the once abandoned barns were transformed into a small community center with a warmly lit library, low shelves for children, a craft corner, and a long pine table where Clara laid her hands each afternoon, teaching the kids to carve wooden birds from scrap pieces she once used to line her stove. I used part of the silver mine's assets to establish the Moonlight Fund, not just for scholarships, but for supporting young artists, local filmmakers, writers, and anyone who simply needed a place to begin again. Clara came every week, said little, but I knew she had forgiven. Not just Eleanor, not just William, but perhaps herself too. I also finished Eleanor's unfinished manuscript, a short story about a town where the moonlight revealed what had been forgotten, and forgiveness came like a breeze on an autumn night. I kept my promise, published it under her name, untouched in voice, adding only the ending I believe she would have written if time had allowed. When the book was printed, I placed one copy in the third shelf of the library, just beneath Eleanor's portrait, where she smiled gently, holding her old fountain pen and a purple globe amaranth bloom. One night, while walking through the fields with Shadow at my side, the full moon floated above an inky sky. The air was soft, the scent of wheat and pine blending into a silent symphony. I stopped in the clearing and looked toward the distance where the silver mine rested. No longer a secret, no longer a prize to be fought over, but a symbol of a story told at the right time, by the right voice. And I thought to myself, Eleanor was right. A legacy isn't what we possess, it's what we pass on, through love, trust, and stories strong enough to light the way for another generation. That afternoon, I was sorting through old mailboxes in the attic, a space Eleanor once jokingly called the upstairs of unspoken things, when I came across a pale yellow envelope, sealed tight, no sender written. But I recognized the handwriting immediately, her slanted script, still faintly scented with mint, as though time itself had preserved it just for this moment. I brought the letter downstairs to the library, sat in the leather chair where she used to read each morning, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small object wrapped in a white lace handkerchief. It was the silver crescent moon brooch she used to wear in old photographs, the one I'd long thought lost. I placed it on the table and began to read. My dearest Ava, if you're reading this letter, it means you've chosen to stay, not to stay for land or legal battles, but for memory, for something greater than yourself. I didn't leave you a map, but you found your way. I didn't give you power, but you chose kindness. Maybe you've doubted yourself, but I never doubted you. I paused for a moment, breath caught between the lines, now blurring before my eyes. This brooch belonged to your great-grandmother, passed down to each woman in our family when they're ready to become the storyteller. It opens no doors, but reminds you that some secrets aren't meant to be kept, but told, with honesty and grace. Don't let the past cage you. Let it light your path. I folded the letter, my hands still holding onto the imagined warmth as if Eleanor stood behind me. Outside, dusk had begun to cast long shadows across the fields, and the first pale moon had risen over the horizon. I pinned the brooch to my shirt, smoothed it once, and stepped outside with Shadow beside me. No one was chasing me anymore. No more doubts. Just the story. Finally. Fully told. If you've ever felt unheard in your own family, ever been doubted simply for choosing a different path, then Ava Harper's story and Eleanor's, might be part of yours too. Leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? And if there's a memory, a legacy, or a person who believed in you when the world didn't, share it. Because sometimes all we need is someone willing to listen until the very last chapter. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it touched you, because someone out there might be needing the moonlight too, to guide them through their longest night.